Done.
Thank you. So I'm based here in California. I've been here for 20 years, and my I run two nonprofits, both focused on learning. One of which is Living Deeply Foundation, which is a foundation I run to teach what we're calling the yoga of living deeply, which is simply taking the principles of the Bhagavad Gita and applying it to a personal life, and applying those principles in a way that that I found to be meaningful and complete. The other is the Hindu Community Institute, which is an interesting program we started 2 years ago in the Bay Area. Where we have people across the US that are participating. And the Hindu Community Institute really is a school for Karma Yoga, which is where you learn to serve the community. So being able to serve is an innate capability as a human being. But just the way our parents teach us to walk, someone needs to teach us how to serve each other. Otherwise, we're just going to randomly offer help, but not really be able to help in the most meaningful manner. And so the Hindu Community Institute, we have a program called the Counselor of Hindu Tradition. And a good part of this program is really, again, learning the Bhagavad Gita, understanding how the Bhagavad Gita applies to life, and being able to apply it to personal, professional life, as well as to the spirit of service that we engage with each other. And so, so both the programs that I run are about the Bhagavad Gita in one way or another. And so, so I give a lot of talks about Bhagavad Gita and how the Bhagavad Gita is applied to personal life. Today's conversation, I really wanted to talk about my approach. How have I approached the topic of the Bhagavad Gita? But if you want, I can double click on some topics as well if you find it interesting and meaningful. You know, if we were keeping this interactive, Raj, I don't know how what is the nature of interaction the team has in general. But if you permit me, I would like to keep it interactive and really talk through my own experience of reading the Gita and learning from the Gita, and the other is some of those lessons. If my computer finally begins to play along with me, then those lessons would be around. One second, I think I've found it to comply. Okay, those lessons are really about. I was going to pick the topic of gunas and just how I have applied the idea of understanding one's own moods and modes of operation in our regular life. So Raj, sorry. So if you could tell me if this group likes to be interactive, or you just want me to.
It is a very interactive group, Gorakh. Right. So the typical format what we have followed so far is we take 1, 2, 3 shlokas depending on what the topic is, and then there's a whole lot of discussion around that, and then we take the week to kind of see how we can implement during that particular week, and then come back the following week and talk about our experiences of applying those principles. Right.
Okay.
But you'll find the group interacting with you very much. Yeah. Having said that, I leave it to you. You feel comfortable whichever way you want to take it forward, and whenever you want us to chime in, we'll do that.
Sure thing. Thank you. So. My journey into the Bhagavad Gita, before that, we talk about my journey into inner spirituality and just the whole philosophy itself. I was born in a religious household in North India. And my father carried a sign. My father would buy things to put on the wall. And there was a sign that I still remember that we had on our wall all through all the homes that we lived in. And that sign was "Work is worship." And he truly believed in it. He was a karma yogi. He was very, very invested in his work. But he was also a very a devout person. So he would wake up early in the morning and do his puja for 2 hours and then go off to work and then come back and do his puja again. So he was very devout, and through osmosis, I picked up a lot of his devotion, even though as a child I wasn't really outwardly very devout. Then I did the usual engineering and an MBA. And while doing my MBA, I went to Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad. And while doing the MBA, I went back home for one of those quarterly visits. And I would always visit this bookshop in South Delhi, and usually to buy interesting books. And this time I came across a book on meditation called Brahma Vidya Abhyas by Swami Bhumanand. And on a whim, I bought the book. I had no interest in Indian philosophy or spirituality at this time. But I bought the book and I came back and started reading it. And the book was really a how-to guide on meditation. So I decided I'm going to practice the meditation that Swamiji had written down. And so while I was doing my MBA, I was also beginning my meditation journey from a book, of course, but still doing it. And then from that point on, that was 25, 26 years ago, I've stepped deeper into Indian philosophy as well as spirituality, and going deeper into texts, going deeper into practices. And when it comes to yoga, I trained as a yoga teacher, physical postural yoga teacher. But I also took initiations from different gurus and systems, learning meditation, but different styles, not just Hindu styles, but also different Tibetan styles as well. Understanding different types of meditation and building my own practice. And learning to apply what I've learned and seeing how that works in my own life. Having done that about 15 years ago, as a joke, frankly, as a joke, my friend ran a popular blog at the time. And because I like to write, I decided I was going to write a series of articles for her. And there used to be a popular series of articles called A Year of Living Biblically, which was somebody writing their experiences of living their life exactly the way the Bible suggests you should. And I thought that might be fun to explore Indian spirituality and Hindu spirituality by reading the Gita and writing about it. So I started reading the Gita and started writing about my reflections. Again, not to make fun of anything, but still in a lighter way. Just saying, look, this is a ancient text. I'm approaching it as a newcomer, and here's what I'm finding. And it was interesting, and I wrote a few sets of articles. But more than the writing itself, I found the Gita very fascinating. And so that began my journey of buying a lot of versions or copies of the Gita. This particular version that I really landed upon at the time was Ramesh Menon's translation of the Gita. And that was interesting. And I read the entire Gita several times. I read different versions or different translations by different people. And the more I read, the more I realized that not only did the Gita appeal to me directly, it also helped me understand my attitude towards work. And so I thought, why don't I convert my writing, my desire to write, into a book on Karma Yoga? And this is about 14 years ago. And so I started to compile my notes. Let me just get to the diary. So I started to compile my notes on Karma Yoga. So things like this, basically. So I would write a lot of notes and and just sketch everything out. All my thoughts, all my observations are into deep diaries. So this whole diary I filled out, and by the end of my attempts at precipitating my thoughts, I realized that the more deeper I went, the lesser I knew. And so my hopes of writing a book on Karma Yoga were soon dashed. And I ended up shelving the project, or at least parking the project until 1 decade later. And what I learned was Karma Yoga isn't something you write about. Karma Yoga is something that you live. And it shows through in your life, shows through in your work, and it radiates out. So the rest of it, from that point on, I started to think about what is Karma Yoga? How do I live it? How does my work reflect these learnings? Because there's no point in reading the Gita as an intellectual pursuit. What's the point of that? And so after that, I continued to read and reflect and work on my understanding. But really, I tried to incorporate all of the learnings into my life and really run a series of experiments and try to really understand what does Karma Yoga feel like? What is the experience of Karma Yoga? What is the experience of Bhakti Yoga? What's the experience of Jnana Yoga? And that led to a whole series of initiations I went to gurus with, and the learning that came out of that. Now, as part of this process, I realized that it wasn't enough to read the English versions, because the translations that I read, and I acquired quite a handsome collection of Gita translations in this process. But I realized that reading the English version is creating a translation gap, which is unacceptable. Because if I am reading E equals mc squared in English terms, it's not enough. Because I may not understand at all the full power of this formula, for example. I need to understand what equals means, for example. If I don't understand mathematical equations, then I can't understand E equals mc squared. I need to know what E, M, and C stand for. What does it mean? And how does everything come together? And Indian spiritual texts are sutras, right? So they're highly concentrated. And because they're highly concentrated and highly summarized, you can't approach Hindu texts the way you would approach English literature, which is that by reading it and by casual reflection, you're going to understand the intention behind what's being written. So I needed to work for my vocabulary from the start. And I needed to understand Hindu spirituality from the ground up. So I really went back and reread Hindu spirituality first from the Upanishads this time. So there were 1 to 2 year periods when I would immerse myself deeply into one guru, one system, and read all their books or hear all their lectures that I could find. So hundreds of hours of lectures I would have heard of one particular guru. And there would be periods where, for example, Divine Life Society, this is in Rishikesh, Swami Krishnananda, excellent lectures, very hard to read if you are approaching it casually, but very rewarding if you're able to understand his cadence, his style of speaking. And there was a period where my own voice would be in the voice, my voice in my head would be in the voice of Swami Krishnananda-ji. And so I went through these periods of building my understanding of Hindu spirituality from the ground up. Multiple systems, multiple gurus, understanding, reading the text directly. Simultaneously, I started to realize that I needed to read Sanskrit directly in order to approach my understanding of the Gita. And so what I did was I bought Gita versions that actually had the original Sanskrit. Uh, so the original Sanskrit text, which is translated word by word, and then the original Sanskrit text translated word by word into full meaning as well as this purports. And so I came into more Gita copies as a result. I did go to school learning Sanskrit, but this was high school Sanskrit, so mileage may vary. I did not grow up learning to sing the text, which I found was a big hurdle in my approaching Indian texts, because you can't hear them the way they were supposed to be heard. Then you're reading them, and reading is very hard. You can't read any Sanskrit verses if you're reading them in plain text. So I had to learn to chant the Gita as well, and so I had to build a practice for reading Sanskrit in a way that I could chant to myself and understand the words individually. So I did that. Finally, I landed upon the versions of the Gita I was going to read, and I learned to understand. For example, I read. I think everyone had S. Radhakrishnanji's Bhagavad Gita translation, very famous in India at the time. But I realized that translations written in English by English thinking intellectual people are actually a very small subset, and in my current conclusion is a very incorrect subset of Gita translations. There's a lot of disservice that you can do to yourself by reading a mistranslated text. So I read those, stopped reading those. Then I read Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, which I have over here. And I also read, finally arrived at these versions, which are really interesting versions for me. Swami Bhumanand's new version, which is really nice. Then, sorry?
I have that. I said I recently.
You have it, yeah.
Yes.
This is great. This is Sanskrit, but not word by word, but with a good essay around every one of the. Because I realized that Swami Bhumanand, my drive for learning how the Gita is applied into personal lives comes really from Swami Bhumanand himself, because my initiation into meditation is through him. And so I realized that my drive is inherited from him. I also liked and memorized verses from the Hari Gita, which is an interesting version of the Gita, because what this is it's written by I don't know if you've seen this version, Raj. You might have seen this.
I have that as well. My mother reads it.
Yeah, it's wonderful, because this is an All India Radio singer in the 1930s who then set the Gita to verse while translating it into Hindi. And because it's in Hindi, I wanted to talk about the Hindi versions as well. Hindi versions are closer to the Sanskrit versions, because you can use the same words and then still explain. So that's what he does. And this one is easier to memorize and understand. So this was a really good version. My final go-to version that I really refer to the most is this one. This is Sadhak Sanjeevani. I'm sure you've seen it or you have it. This is by Swami Ramsukh Das Ji, also in Rishikesh. An amazing version of the Gita, because what he does here is unparalleled in all the Gita translations that I've seen, which is he takes a meticulous approach to the Gita, which is he not only translates word by word, of course he does that. He writes the entire thing in Hindi, which is what you expect. He writes an essay, which you would, of course, expect, but he does more than that. He takes each word, each tense, each articulation, and compares it to the rest of the Gita. And so his vision of the Gita is the most interesting vision of the Gita that you can think of, because he takes an accountant's view of the Gita. He will say, he's been called Dhananjaya 15 times in this book, in the Gita. Now, which means he went through the whole Gita enough times to count this. Then he will say in this particular verse, he's using this particular word. This word is referred to in this sense here. In other places, namely this chapter and that verse, it's referred to in a different sense over there. So he does a very meticulous, web-like translation of the Gita, which is very useful, which is why it's called Sadhat Sanjeevani, because this is truly a life-giving and a meaning-giving version of the Gita, which I found very interesting and very compelling for me, especially when I need to understand the text. So those are the versions of the Gita that I started to read and understand. And all this while, you remember I told you about the Karma Yoga book that I wanted to write. All this while, I've been trying to figure out in my own mind, how do I synthesize everything? How do I synthesize everything in a way that I can actually apply to my life? How can I synthesize everything in a way that I can apply to my life, in a way that it shows through in my actions? How do I synthesize everything in a way that it shows through in my actions and I'm able to communicate to other people what has been said and understood? So I'm repeating myself in a way that you're understanding the layers of sort of unveiling that I've tried to go through. And so as I tried to synthesize, I realized that most of the Gita versions and translations and lectures I was reading were from a particular school of thought. And each school of thought is designed by the articulator, whoever is writing the bhashya. They are writing it from their perspective. And in a way to explain their point of view, they are dismissing the alternate points of view methodically. What does that mean? Srila Prabhupada, for example, from ISKCON, his version of the Gita dismisses the meditative schools outright, because the only meditation that he will allow is chanting Harina, right? So chanting the name of God is the only meditation that he would allow. So every verse in the Gita that refers to sitting and meditating, he would discount it, or he would interpret it in his way. So every bhashya is written from other than Swami Ram Sundar-ji, every other bhashya that I read tends to be from a particular school of thought. A couple of years ago, there was a very nice lady in the Bay Area who used to write, and who, with a lot of love and compassion, she'd written a lot of books on the Gita. She would give away books on the Gita. She ran the annual Gita Gita Day at the temple, and she had cancer, and so a few years ago she was giving away her books, her library of books. So she called me one day and she said, "Beta, come and I need to give you books." And she gave me a full wall of books with a lot of love. And so I also got the Gita from Bal Gangadhar Tilak and several other versions of the Gita. In fact, this Sadhat Sanjeevani that I have in my hand and the Hari Gita, both incidentally, are from that lady. So she gave them, and then later she expired sadly. But all the schools that I read, all the versions of the Gita that I read, tended to be presenting one perspective at the expense of the other. And that seemed interesting, but it seemed to me incomplete. And I'm not making a big deal out of it, but I felt that why would Sri Krishna talk about how to meditate in the Gita if he didn't think that was a meaningful way of meditating, right? Why would he describe a whole process for meditation, for example, if he didn't think that was important? So I felt that I needed to resynthesize the Gita for myself into my own practice. And a few years ago, I started to work on my own synthesis of what the Gita means to me. And I ended up creating a whole web of thought. Let me see if I can pull up the web of thought. Okay, so let me see if I can, and I'm sharing my screen very quickly because my intention is not to show you these slides. It's not a slide, but not to show you the whole thing, but I'm just describing my own evolution in a way, hopefully that's meaningful. I see my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
It says started screen sharing, but we don't
Okay, coming soon, I guess. Okay, 1 second. It's probably coming soon. So I think my computer is running some sort of a backup process. So it's running really slow. It's come, right? Okay, great. 1 second. Okay. So let me see if I can put up. The computer is running really slow today because it's maybe running some sort of backup process. We'll have to sacrifice that 1 second. Okay. Okay, let me see. So yeah, so I'm not able to move my computer around too fast. Okay, here. Okay, good. I'm able to do it now. Okay. All right. So I ended up building my own web of thoughts. I like to think using mind maps. And I ended up creating my own web of thought to understand all the ideas within the Gita as well as Patanjali Yoga Sutra, as well as yoga texts that I was coming into. And then really try to synthesize it for my own self. My first conclusion was that all of life is really a search for fulfillment, purnata. And we live out our entire lives looking for fulfillment in the external material world. And because it's impossible in the material world, we are obviously frustrated in this process. And we end up leading frustrated and incomplete lives. The other conclusion that I had was that it is not enough to think of these strands of yoga individually. Karma yoga, Ashtanga yoga, which includes both dhyana and jnana, and bhakti yoga are not separate. It is incorrect and impossible to think of these three strands as being independent strands. I have to think of them in a braided manner. So the example that's often cited in this case is Swami Vivekananda was told by his guru that Ramakrishna Paramahansa, that to make kheer, you have to have rice, you have to have milk, and you have to have sugar. And so you need the robustness of Karma Yoga. You need the clarity, kshira, of the Jnana Yoga that comes from your meditative practices. And you need the sweetness of Bhakti Yoga. And only then is the kheer complete. Otherwise, it's incomplete. And so the project then for me became, how do I, my own personal practices, how do I incorporate Bhakti Yoga Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga through the process of meditation into my personal discipline, my own sadhana, but also how can I now, like you were seeing in the diagram over here, how can I try to distill this system for myself and for other people? And over the last few years, I've been working on this. So the mind map, the web I showed you, contains a lot of nodes and a lot of details beyond that, which I didn't want to bore you with it. Each of which is a separate thought, a separate individual idea. So when I told you about E equals MC squared, the equivalent of E equals MC and the process of squaring, each of those are called out separately in this master diagram. And to me, the rest of my life is really going to be spent in converting this into a series of experiential learnings for myself, but also a series of lectures, courses, and cohorts for the rest of my life. So, for example, at this point, my intention is, my hope is to bring Hindu spirituality, the spirituality mentioned in the Gita, but also elsewhere, into the public sphere. What does that mean? What it means is, when we think in English, as we are all rational, scientific sounding people, we use words and concepts in the English language. But we're incapable of thinking completely because all this spiritual wealth is removed from us. We have no access to it. Those words are not available to us. Those concepts are not available to us. So modern conversation does not seem to have these ideas available in the modern discourse. The reasons for that are many. One, not enough philosophers are crediting their thought directly to Indian sources. Two, not enough poets and writers and authors are actually reading and understanding these sources and conveying it to in a popular way. Third is, not enough research, academic research is being done on these ideas. Why is that important? If you look at the idea of gross domestic product, entire schools of economics have been set up to discuss it, right? And so over generations, those ideas have seeped into popular culture, and we think of these words and these concepts. The ideas in the Gita are not available to popular knowledge. Maybe a couple of shlokas that everyone remembers, but even those are poorly translated and poorly understood. So for these ideas to truly be available in society, we need to recreate the culture. We need to be able to do deeper research into these ideas and be able to communicate them in a scholarly manner as well as in a popular manner. And that is a lifetime of work ahead of me and ahead of all of us who are doing this sort of work. All right, I'm going to pause here because I know I went through a very long sequence of thought without allowing you to ask me questions. So why don't you ask me questions at this point? Any reflections or questions that you have, I'd be happy to get to it.
So Gaurav, great introduction, right? I think kind of sets the context of where you are coming from, in your journey of Bhagavad Gita. I just wanted to pause and say, there are three of us in this room listening to you. Meena is here,
Hi,
right
Gaurav.
next to me.
How are you?
Hello. Very well, thank you.
Good to see you. Very nice.
Hello.
Tanvi is here.
Hello. Hello.
Amazing. Very engaging. Very interesting. Very interesting. We've been listening. So I thought
Thank
I'd say hi to you.
Yeah. Sure. Any questions or comments? By the way, if you see this behind me setup, it's because I'm sure Raj, you already know, I teach meditation. I teach meditation online. I run a program that does free yoga classes every day. We've done about almost 1,100 classes since the beginning of the epidemic. These are free classes. Most of them are yoga classes, but every day we do a meditation class. And some days I run the meditation class. I sit right here behind you, behind me, and that's why this setup is the way it is. My entire office is really also a meditation room, and so you see my meditation cushion over there. So that's the setup over here. And the meditation I teach tends to be different schools. But while I took initiation, I don't have authority to transmit those schools of meditation down to people. So what I do instead is through my own experimentation, the meditations that I've arrived at, those are the ones that I teach, and that's what's happening behind me. So any questions or comments at this stage?
So Gaurav, what I think the group will really be interested in is, so you explained the journey very nicely. As to how you take it and apply it in your day-to-day life, whether it is situations at work, whether it is situations at home, or whatever life throws at you. How do you take these principles of Gita, and then, if you can talk about, maybe a shloka or two, or,
Sure.
Right? At least that's what, I'm looking for. Bala, Vivek, Asha, if you have anything else to ask, Rambhai. So let me just very quickly introduce the people on the call. So
Yes.
I have Meena and Tanvi. Also have Bala, the gentleman in blue shirt out here. So Bala used to head chronic communications in India.
Raj, sorry for the interruption.
Yes.
In the interest of time, would we allow actually Mr. Rastogi to answer the very specific question that you asked, because that was also what I was expecting.
Sure. So let me very quickly run through the people, and then introduce the people, and then I'll allow Gaurav to go ahead. So Bala used to head chronic communications in India, has retired since then, but he's a brilliant singer. So all satsangs in our house, for last almost 12, 15 years, he has been doing that. The one with the name DW is actually my brother Ramlal. He's joined us from Hyderabad. Then I have got Vivek out here, the gentleman with headphones. Okay, Usha and Asha, both of them. You're able to see her now.
Yes.
She's a principal at Rashtrotana Vidyalaya. And Asha is again part of Rashtrotana Vidyalaya. She's the one because of whom this whole group has come together. So she keeps on bringing people to this group, and she's
Hi, Gaurav.
initiative about Gita.
Namaste.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll hand it over back to you, Gorakh. And
Okay.
if anybody else has any questions, you can ask.
Those are great. Yes. Okay. Let's. So your specific question is, you want to know how I've taken one verse or one aspect of the Gita and implemented into my own life, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about my personal experience, but then we'll talk about how I think all of us can apply those principles to their own lives as well. All right. I'll give you my personal reflection first, and then we'll get to the application part. So in the Gita, Bhagavan Krishna says, Yoga karma su kaushalam. Yoga karma su kaushalam. And the whole context there, I'm just focusing on this phrase right now because I'm going to unpack that from my own perspective and my own life. Yoga karma su kaushalam. Yoga is skill at work. Now, what does it mean? Does it simply mean that you have to be skilled at work? you have to, what does it mean to be skilled at work in the first place? And why is that karma yoga? So first thing is to understand the word kaushal itself. Of course, it comes from the cutting of the kusha grass, where kusha grass has sharp blades at the top and it's more pliable at the bottom. And so when you're cutting the kusha grass, as you would for a meditation cushion, you need to hold the grass properly, otherwise you will cut your hands. And so kaushal is the skillful handling of the kusha grass itself. And this skill, if applied incorrectly, if you're not skilled, can lead to a cutting of the hands, for example, in this case. And applying skill like a scalpel is the sense that I apply to my own life as well. And for that, I have a very ready experience that I use as a teachable moment for myself and for all the work I do. Now, how do I apply it to my life? Everything that I do it with the spirit of learning, with a spirit of failure that comes with upfront, but also with the spirit of learning the most interesting and skilled way of doing that particular thing. So, for example, in my professional work, I need to make presentations. So I don't just make presentations. I have a whole theory of making presentations. I have practical things that I've done, and I teach that. So I want to be really good at the things that I'm doing, because only then I'm able to enjoy the work. That's one. The other is, if I'm not good at something, it takes me longer. So another example is I do a lot of video editing now because I record a lot of my own videos. And video editing is a skill I could easily outsource. I could pay someone to edit my videos, and I should probably do it. But for fun and for learning the craft, I actually do all my video and audio editing myself. And for that, I've had to learn the skills, the tools of the trade, and go through the frustrating experience of not being good at it until I'm good at it. But now I have a virtuoso capability with the tools that I work with. I handle several websites. For my own institute, I handle the website. I'm the dean at the Hindu Community Institute. I'm a board member. There is no reason for me to be actually doing the website editing myself. But even now, I am the fastest guy on the website. If something needs to be done on the website, they know that their competition, my team's competition, is Gorakh-ji. And so the threat that threat is a fun word, but so the web leader, the web development leader that we have, she has this notice out to her team that, look, if you're going to take this long, you know that Gorakh-ji will already finish it. So please learn to do this quickly, otherwise Gorakh-ji will do it. Right? So I can edit websites quicker than my team can. I can edit and make better presentations than anyone that I know. When it comes to working on spreadsheets, I'm really good at making spreadsheet models. I began my career as an equities analyst. So I'm good at it. I'm saying this not to boast about my capabilities. I'm just saying that yoga karma sukashalam, acquiring skill at work, is a lifetime capability. And being able to apply it, learn that, and applying that to everything you do becomes a lifetime capability. But why is this?
So Gorakh, can I throw a curveball at you?
Sure.
So, I read this somewhere and, it kind of stayed with me. I don't remember now which book I read or where I read it. So exactly on the same shloka, Yoga Karma Sukashalam, right? The question was, so if you're a pickpocket and you're very skilled at it, can that be termed as yoga? So can that be termed as yoga?
If that is your Swadharma, absolutely that can be termed as yoga. The point is that Swadharma. Because if that is your Swadharma, sure. But I don't know too many pickpockets whose Swadharma is pickpocketing. But if it is, sure. the thing with the Gita translations, which by the way comes to a very important point, Raj, that I did want to make later on, is you cannot cherry pick phrases from the Gita and not link to the whole web of concepts and ideas that are being laid out. Because then what happens is a mistranslation happens almost immediately. It's not merely the acquisition of skills, which is karma yoga, of course. It is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. There are many other aspects to karma yoga itself. But absolutely, if you're a pickpocket, you better be a good pickpocket. That is absolutely right. Because again, the experience I have is here. Hopefully you'll be able to see my head over here, but if you don't see it, what you're supposed to see is a scar. I shaved my head, no surprises there, because both, of course, the Manduka and Mundaka Upanishad forced me to do it. I have to shave my head. But because I shaved my head, it's another lesson I had in Yoga Karma Sukashana. How? It turns out one of these days I shaved my head while I'm bathing, and sometimes the Gillette razor that you have, the thing with the 4 blades in it, it's old and you haven't replaced it. Sometimes you don't have time and you're just doing it mindlessly. Just like you comb, you just shave, right? And one of those days, and also when you shave your head, if you shave your beard, it's the same way. You have to pay attention to the terrain, the shape of your beard, the flow of your hair, the curvature of the skin, and the shape placement of bone. All of these are important factors when it comes to shaving. Otherwise, all of the men on this call know you can cut yourself. And one of these days, I cut myself over here. A big gash. Obviously, there's no hair here, but big gash. And now it's a permanent scar on my head. But it's a permanent reminder of Yoga Karma Sukashanam in ways that I did not expect. It is not merely important to have a skilled razor, a sharp razor. Karma Sukashanam, the kaushal is having sharp tools and a sharp understanding of your tools, but that's not enough. You also have to pay attention to the course of the skin on your head. I was going this way, but thinking that way. If you're not paying attention to the way your skin is, you will cut yourself. What that means in real life is when you're applying your skill, it isn't just about your skill. You have to see what your inner dharma wants. You have to see what your external dharma wants. What are the demands of the situation? What are the demands coming from inside you? And where do those two meet at a convenient and pliable place? And that, because that is always changing, the terrain of contact between your skill and your context is always changing, always changing. And so you always have to be completely sensitive to your swadharma and your external dharma, which comes down to me to the first 2 words spoken in the Bhagavad Gita. And those are by Dhritarashtra, which is Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetra. Now, traditional interpretations don't parse these words as closely. They look down upon the parsing of the words for reasons I stated earlier, because you always mistranslate if you look at individual words. But to me, this is important. Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetra can easily be parsed into the field of action and the field of dharma. It applies very directly to the act of shaving yourself. Which is, again, the man on this call, no? If you're not paying attention to the sharpness of your blade, the curvature of your skin, the inherent tendencies of the hair on your face, then you're going to cut yourself and you're going to bleed. And that kshetra is always changing. Always changing. The contact between the inner and outer is always changing. And so you can't take rough rules of thumb. You can't take a commandment-like approach and saying, thou shalt not X, Y, or Z. And that is why dharma is a very complex subject, because the context determines the dharma as much as the space and the time do. And so now coming back to yoga karma sukha, it is merely acquiring skills. It is also acquiring the nuance to understand what your inner state is and what the external state is. I'll give you another example if this is not approachable. If you've skied or bicycled before, you know this as well. There's saying in skiing, when they teach you skiing, I'm sure they say this in bicycling as well, is look where you're going or you'll go where you're looking. If you learn skating, it's the same thing. All these skills that require contact between, that require a surrenderful contact between an inner state and an outer state. I'll repeat that. A surrenderful, this is not a forced contact. You have to surrender your state and your inner body, the center of gravity of your body and the gravity of the earth below have to be in synchrony. Wherever those things apply, like skiing, snowboarding, skating, bicycling. When they teach you, look where you're going or you'll go where you're looking. So in skiing also, if you're looking this way and your legs are pointing this way, what's going to happen? Which way are you going to go? It turns out your weight is going to shift in this direction. It's miraculous how that happens, but this is the law of nature. Now, why is this important? It's important because if your external intention is to go this way, but your mind is going this way, as in my case, I'm shaving this way, but my mind is going some other way. That mismatch causes mishaps. That acquiring the ability to read the context and understand the context is also karma yoga. Is also karma sukha. It is not merely the act of pickpocketing with skill. It is also knowing which pockets to pick and at what point those pockets are pickable. When not to pick such pockets is also part of yoga karma sukha. It is not merely just this. The other part is the surrender part. It turns out karma yoga requires sarvarambha parityagi, right? Which is surrender at the beginning, not surrender at the end. Of course, everyone surrenders in the end. Who in this world has ever not surrendered in the end? Everyone has to surrender in the end. But at the beginning of the action, if you're surrendering, then you're saying, let my will be subsumed under thy will, right? Let your will flow through, not because I'm big and I'm saying, no, you please do it. No, it's simply I recognize that my will is nothing. Whatever you want to happen will only happen. So please let me be the tool for your action. I am a nimitta. I'm just a medium for action. Allow me to remove myself from this equation. I'm your medium. I'm a sharp blade. Go ahead and use me as you will. So that surrendering is very important in karma yoga. But that's not enough. The advantages of karma yoga are this. If you're skilled at wielding the blade, and again, if you cut vegetables, it's the exact same thing. If you're skilled at wielding the blade does all the work. If you're applying force, you either have a bad blade or you don't have a good understanding of what you're doing. So sharpening the saw, as Stephen Covey says, sharpening the blade is a very important part of karma yoga. Because once your blade is sharp, the work happens by itself. The work happens on its own, of its own volition. And so everything becomes easy if you know what you're doing and you're getting out of the way. I'm going to pause and see if there's any reactions to that.
I kind of lost you, Gaurav, at the
So I was talking about when you're skilled, you heard me until the end, right? Which is when you're skilled at a particular activity, the activity happens of its own volition. I'll give you another example.
No, I got that.
Yes, sir, yes.
Last sentence.
Yeah, got it. Just the last few words. Yeah. So, for example, every person who is a Olympic level runner, for example, or a singer or an artist or a creative, almost everyone has the same experience, which is, I don't know who did this, right? It happened. Great orators, singers also report the same thing, right? Which is, I was hearing it the same time you were hearing it. My job was to acquire the skills to sing, for example, and get out of the way. And then I'm also hearing it the same way as you are. And that is karma sukashana, because then the act itself becomes a joyous experience. And you're enjoying it in the moment. And the act is happening with minimal effort. But it takes a lot of effort to do things with minimal effort. And your entire life is spent in really sharpening the saw and making sure that your skills are of the highest order. Questions or comments?
Okay, so Bala, Asha, Vivek, anybody has anything to say, ask, Rambhai?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Asha.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm just listening and trying to internalize whatever I've heard. So as of now, I do not have any questions.
Sure. So that's the idea of karma sukashana. The way I
Gaurav, Bala has a question.
Balaji, you have a question, please. Yes.
Sorry, just call me Bala. All right, I might look old, but that's okay.
No, sorry. I want to interrupt. At the Hindu Community Institute, it turned out that I was the youngest of the founders in the institute. And out of respect for me and just to make it fun for everyone, we gave everyone a middle initial, G. So now we call everyone G. So,
Right.
so I've become used to Balaji, yes.
All right, okay. Anyway, because Balaji is also a formal name in India, as you probably know.
That's true, that's true.
Bala. All right. So, anyway, jokes apart, on the very first point that you mentioned, that in terms of skill, you talked about your own personal experience about your ability to design website, you fixed them and you did them, and a whole lot of things connected with the activity that your organization is engaged in. To cut the chase, if you were working in an organization and you were a general manager, you have multiple disciplines and multiple people working for you. Now, in the time and space in which we run organizations today, I don't know very truly whether a leader requires to be a domain expert in everything that is required to run a company. And the world has, if you look at a typical manufacturing organization, the world has moved from the good old days when it made everything from soups to nuts in one place. They outsource quite a lot, and you probably sit in a city which is very familiar with this process of outsourcing. And you know that, yes, I am not an expert in this space, but I wouldn't waste time in developing that skill and learning about it when I know that I can get this done from somebody else. So how do I relate to your personal experience of trying to gain skills that are required within the organization as opposed to trying and focusing on what I need to do as a core, but outsource everything else. So is that a dichotomy that I see, or am I seeing it wrongly? That's my first question. And I'll come to the second one a little later, if there is
All right.
time.
Sure. All right. Let me talk about it. This is actually a very fantastic, very good question. Do you need to be good at everything? Because obviously you can't be good at everything. There's too many things going on in the world. Knowing what not to be good at is also a skill, and that is a skill you need to be good at. In the experience that I related for myself, the attitude I have to acquiring skills is I do it for the pleasure of learning, and I do it because it keeps me engaged, it keeps me challenged. And I talk about the flow state, which I'm not getting into over here, but to remain in a flow state, I have to continue to challenge myself and continue to acquire skills. So it's not everything that I'm trying to do, but those things that I happen to need, for example, website, I need it for my own stuff. So on my own personal work, I've become good at it. Presentations I make for a living, this is what I do professionally, so I have to be good at it. Things that I need to do personally, I need to be good at. Things that I don't need to be personally, I still need to be good at acquiring taste. Taste is still very important, because if you don't know what good is, you're going to settle for okay. And that's not good. One. Two, you need to be able to ask and demand quality from other people, because only then is the team able to produce higher quality, because you've insisted on higher standards and more efficiency in that sense. So acquiring taste is still a skill, and it's very important as a leader. The third is teaching those skills and delegating and staying back. For the website example I gave you, I don't actually do the website myself. That's just an idle thread the website developer she leads hands out to the team below her, working with her, which is, if I get into everything, I can't do everything, right? I'll waste my time and the team's time. Plus the team will not be self-sufficient. So you have to apply your skills sparingly here and there. But it's good to have skills just for your own pleasure. The important thing is not that you acquire all the skills that are within your ambit of control, but that you have a joyful and engaged attitude towards acquisition of skills. That you're doing this with a spirit of learning for the heck of it.
Yeah, I quite agree with that standpoint of learning, expanding your knowledge, enjoying everything that life throws at you. You know, that's fine. That's perfectly all right. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a part two that we did not get to.
Well, before I go to part two, I just want to ask Raj if we do have a hard stop at 7:30, because I don't want to hog on somebody else's time if they have a question. I can always come back if there isn't any.
So we have another 15 minutes, Bala. We have a hard stop at 7:30.
Okay, but does anyone else have another question to ask? In which case I will come back after a first round.
I think Vivek had, I think.
Yeah, this is Vivek here. One general question. What about all the rest of the ecosystem? Some, few minutes on, because there is so many things, and in a way, this Gita is like the condensation of all the things. So any comments on what is your approach to, because everything has to reconcile finally. So any observation on that? Yeah.
By ecosystem, you're referring to the ecosystem of thought,
Vedas, Upanishads, and all the, in that sense, basically
So Sarva Upanishad Gavo, Dogdha Gopal Nandana, right? So all the Upanishads are cows, and this Gita is the milk that has been produced by the Upanishadic cows. I'm also reading Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'm also and that's been many years in the running, so that's my daily practice. And I'm realizing that there's all these texts are linked and they refer to each other in very interesting and very surprising, unexpected ways as well, where one verse you read in the Gita, you will also see in another Upanishad. Sometimes verbatim, sometimes just indirectly. So all these ideas are linked. And the Gita is actually, depending on which school of thought you look at, the Gita is either a PhD level text or a bachelor level text, depending on which school of thought you look at. For example, in the ISKCON system, the Gita is the first text, Srimad Bhagavatam next, and Chaitanya Charitamrita next, because those are the sort of the sweetness increases along this path, which is you begin with the Gita, you go to Srimad Bhagavatam, where of course there's a lot of philosophy and leelas mentioned in that. And then of course Chaitanya Charitamrita is a lot of leelas and a lot of philosophy in a very rich, meaningful manner. So all the texts are refer to each other, Vivek, to point out. But how do you distill those into a vision for a modern life is an interesting and important question. What I find personally disconcerting is I have followed a lot of Vedanta schools as well. Now Vedanta schools focus on the jnana at the cost of actual meditative practices or actual bhakti practices. And I find that limiting now in hindsight, because when I was in those schools, I was understanding the intent very clearly, and I still understand the intent as advertised, but I find that incomplete. If that, for example, I teach meditation. I teach Om chanting, meditation with Om chanting. And it surprises me no end that people have read Mandukya Upanishad from the Vedanta point of view, but have never meditated. People have read the Gita and have never meditated, or never sat, or never chanted Om, never understood the pronunciation and as embodied in the body, right? So what happens with that is, as Bhagavan says in chapter 12, the practices are hard and your realization fickle. You will come to a realization, but it'll come and go. It'll come and go. You'll have flashes of realization, then it disappears. Why? Because it's very hard for those practices to stabilize. And an infinite universe cannot be contained just as an infinity, for example. So bhakti is very important, for example. But for the ability, all these schools are interlinked is the point that I was coming to. And what I find in modern schools of thought, many modern gurus that I've read tend to focus on their lineage and what their lineage taught, without having gone across the board and lived other lineages as well in order to synthesize their point of view. And again, I'm not Raj, I've not participated in Art of Living or Isha, so I don't know those schools. But the schools I have sort of participated with tend to have a very interestingly nuanced perspective. But how do you take all the ancient texts, which are highly concentrated and aphoristic, right? So they're aphorisms. And how do you then convert those into ways of living? Is a very important question, because otherwise what happens is, for example, today my intention was to talk about the gunas, right? You may understand intellectually what gunas are, and yet not be able to counter your inner moods or understand your own modes of operation. But that synthesis needs to be done. People need to be able to understand it in their own life context and be able to have that knowledge seep into their life. And that's a very difficult problem because the texts are very wide. There are millions of books. There are millions of one verse text. And understanding each of those could be a lifetime's work. So how do you live a life where you only have a piecemeal understanding of the tradition? It's a very difficult question for us. And in the Hindu tradition, the good news is we still remember a lot of our texts. The bad news is we have museumized our tradition. We only remember our text almost as a museum text, but not as a lived text. And to recreate the full grandeur, we have to force ourselves to understand how these learnings can be applied into everyday life. I don't have time today, but I could talk to you about some of the frameworks that we're building at the Institute just to solve this. There are two that I will just mention by name here. One is we're figuring out the answer to the question, how are you doing? The answer to the question, how are you doing, is not, I'm fine, thank you. Of course, that's what you say in modern language. But really understanding quality of life and what improves or worsens quality of life. It's the most central of questions for any society. And it's the least understood question. And so we're working on that. I have a team working on that that we're working figuring it out. Another thing is, as we go through life, how does our life evolve? And what is the meaning and purpose of every moment of our life? Any interaction? Those are things that we're trying to learn. So, Vivek, to answer your question directly, it's not enough to read the text and to quote it. You now have to also understand how that experience can be transmitted. The whole point of the Indian tradition is intuition. It is an insight that comes from within. If I see it, but you don't see it, then you don't see it. If you see it and I don't see it, it's the same way. How can you see something and transmit that intuition to me? That's the big question, right? And what needs to happen is you need to read the text and say, that is Shravan Manan Nididhyasana, right? So hear it, think about it, and then let it seep into your being. That's the big and more important part. And many people just satisfy themselves with the Shravan and Manan part, but they don't persist until it seeps into their entire being.
Okay, thanks.
Coming to the end of our time, almost there, I think, in another 4 minutes. So, Bala, if you have anything to ask, which can be done very quickly, I think we'll take the class.
Raj, I think it would be, because we're just now, I think the meditation is already starting now. So it would be unfair of me to ask the question and expect everybody to wait. So can we look at another opportunity?
Yes. Oh, that should be fine with you, right? To have you back.
Sure, yeah. Sure, of course, yeah. Happy to.
We'll schedule something in.
Always good to meet like-minded people.
Yes. So Gorakh, thank you very much. Really pleasurable and really joyful to hear your thoughts on Bhagavad Gita. Very, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Bye, Meena. Bye. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Very nice. So much in
Bye-bye.
Really good. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.